This morning we're going to talk about the subject of predestination. And I was racking my brain this week trying to think of an analogy that would work for predestination. And I really had a hard time coming up with one. Because the idea of predestination, and we'll get into it here in just a moment, is that something was set in stone ahead of time. That it was going to happen no matter what. And the problem for us humans is we really have no way of doing that. A story that came to my mind was something that happened to Margaret and I last year. We had flown down to California to attend an important event, and we needed to get back for Sunday morning because it was Resurrection Sunday. Very important for the pastors to be here on Resurrection Sunday. But we were calling it really close on our airline connection. So close, in fact, that the airline made us sign this little waiver that's saying, we cannot be responsible if you don't make your flight. But I thought, we've got the tickets. The flights are not, we'll be able to get from one place to another and get on this flight. Our destination is certain. But that was not to be the case. In fact, what happened is we flew from one airport to the other, and then there was so much construction at this other airport that they delayed us getting from one gate to the other. And we told the gate agent what was going on. They didn't speed up. We said, you need to let the gate know, and they didn't. And so we ran up literally as the door was closing to the plane. And what ensued was sort of an evening of nightmares. But we did actually end up getting on the plane. And I never forget that feeling. The last people were getting on the last flight to Portland, and then they suddenly called our names and they handed us a ticket and we walked through that door. And that was a great feeling. Then we knew we were going to reach our destination. But up until that point, things were very uncertain. And yet somehow God has been able to not only figure out where we're going to end up flying or not flying on a particular day, but He's got it figured out where we're going to end up in our eternal destiny. And He has worked everything out. I mean, it's like if you play chess, you can plan a certain number of moves ahead. And if you're really good, you can really plan as somebody moves one piece, they made the Karpinski move. Rank amateur. I'll be checkmated in 7 moves. And you can plan this all out ahead of time. And it's almost like God in this universe is this grand chess master. But He can move not just pieces on a chessboard, He can move atoms and molecules and emotions and people and nations and time in order to make it all work out exactly like He wanted to. And that just blows me away. So this is where we're at in Ephesians chapter 1. We're going to start in verse 5. Let's catch up a little bit, beginning in verse 3. And if you remember, Paul is writing Ephesians to a group of believers, people who know the Lord. And he's just really trying to encourage them. There isn't any problem he's trying to address. He wants to let them know a little bit about why it is that their salvation is so wonderful. And so in verse 3, he begins this 202 long Greek sentence that goes all the way through verse 14. We started looking at it where he says, praise the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. And this whole thing is about praising God, who has blessed us in Christ with every spiritual blessing in the heavens. And remember, as we talked about that, the idea of blessing is to have an advantage. And it's not an ethereal kind of by and by advantage. Spiritual, the word spiritual denotes God's dimension, and God's dimension is more real than ours, and so the advantages that He gives to us are real and they are here. They just aren't based upon the values of this age. Riches, physical health, beauty, athletic prowess, political power, all those things are things that this age values. But God's advantages that He gives us are the ability to reflect His character, the ability to withstand the pressure from the enemy, the ability to do whatever He has called us to do. Nothing can stand in the way of God's will being done in your life. Now, I know sometimes we're the ones who stand in the way, but God's at work on us. And He gives us these spiritual blessings, and He wants us to know that this happened to us not just by happenstance. In verse 4, for He chose us in Him before the foundation of the world to be holy and blameless in His sight in love. There is a purpose that God has chosen you for. And that choosing, very, very important. It wasn't that God liked you and didn't like you. He shows no favoritism in this choice. It's not random. He didn't just pick, split the room in half. You get chosen and you don't. But it also shows that God had an individual personal interest in every person that He chose. And we come to the argument as we talked about, well, if God chooses some and not others, well, what about those people that don't get chosen? Can they come to Christ too? Well, absolutely. And you don't know whether you've been chosen or not until it is that you reach out to Christ and you find, wow, I have been chosen. And people go, but it's not fair. It seems very arbitrary, and we need to understand that God is not arbitrary. God is just. He is fair. At the end, when it's all said and done, everyone will say, you know what? You were right. You were fair in your choices. And that there's this interplay between the free will of man and the choices or the election of God, and it's called compatibilism. It means that God's choices and our choices can work together. The idea, the purpose by which God has chosen us, which happened before He even began the universe, He wrote the whole thing out. If you are been involved in a project at work, if you are a project management type of person, they have all these tools, and there's a whole institute you can go to for learning how to do project management. Well, God the Father is the ultimate project manager. He was able to write His entire plan out from the beginning. But then the beautiful thing is, because God is so powerful, He's able to make His plan happen. And that's really what predestination is all about. But this purpose that He is using is to make us holy and blameless in His sight. Called out, separated, different, because we are reflecting the character of God, and without blame. And He's able to make that happen, whereas we're not. So then we come to verse 3, where He says, He predestined us to be adopted through Jesus Christ for Himself, according to His favor and will, to the praise of His glorious grace that He favored us with in the Beloved. So as God chose us before the universe began, so now He is setting the course of the universe to come to a particular outcome for us. And that's predestination. Let's look at that word first, predestination. It's the Greek word proorizo, and it means to set a boundary or to mark out a thing in advance. Part of that word comes down to us in English as horizon. So you can look out and see the horizon. It's a definite thing, especially if you're on the ocean or you're out on the plains. You can look out and you can see there's a certain point at which you cannot see any further, and that's the horizon. We know the curvature of the earth makes it so you can only see a certain number of miles. But it's a definite thing, and proorizo means you have set that definite thing in advance. It's an interesting word because we don't find this word used in Greek literature before the Apostle Paul. He probably coined the term. He's the one who first wrote it. And it's used 6 times in the New Testament. And every time it's used of God. Because He's the only one that could actually think of something to do in advance and then absolutely make sure that it happens even before the whole thing starts. Romans chapter 8, verse 29. For those He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son. That's what we're talking about here in Ephesians as well, to be holy and blameless in His sight. That is the image of His Son. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, Paul wrote, We do speak a wisdom among the mature, but not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. On the contrary, we speak God's hidden wisdom in a mystery, a wisdom God predestined before the ages for our glory. So God's mysterious plan of salvation that threw so many people for a loop before Jesus came, God pre-designed for that plan to be revealed through Jesus Christ. And then even in the book of Acts, we read this word predestination, where we read, in fact, this city, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, with the Gentiles and the people of Israel, assembled together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed to do whatever your hand and your plan had predestined to take place. So even the sufferings of Jesus were predetermined by God. And not just predetermined, but it was going to happen exactly like God said it was going to. Now, I want to stop there for just a moment, because I don't know about you, but my life often feels like a series of unrelated coincidences or unrelated events that don't seem to have anything to do with each other. It seems very random, but there's really nothing random at all about your life. And that is sometimes really hard for us to swallow, especially when some of those random things are really, really tough to go through. And we start thinking, well, okay, then if it's not random, God must not like me very much because He's let these things happen in my life. And nothing could be further from the truth. God allows difficulties into our lives in order to do all kinds of purposes that He has predetermined to take place. Suffering can teach us to be more reliant on Him. Suffering can simply be a way that we reflect the sufferings of Christ out into the world around us. Now that one is just blows me away. Going through a difficult time and other people see what you're going through can also just be a way that we, as the Bible calls, fill up the sufferings of Christ. But there is nothing random in your life. God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. See, it's all His purpose. So knowing that, the next time you hit a really rough patch, remind yourself, as hard as this is, I know nothing happens without God having predetermined it ahead of time. So there must be something He's doing in this difficulty. And I preach that to myself as much as I do to you guys, because I know what it's like to go through periods when you feel very uncertain and really questioning God. Why did you allow this to happen? And it's hard in those times for us to really trust that He knows what He's doing. It's part of the project plan. I mean, he's got Microsoft Project, on his PC. But He's got those things all drilled down to the finest point, and you can trust Him that He is working all things together for good. Predestination is just a God-designed purpose. Now, in this case, His purpose that Paul is talking about here in verse 5 of Ephesians chapter 1 is He predestined us to be adopted through Jesus Christ, to be adopted into His family. So God has to get from making a decision about us, a choice, to acting upon that decision and making it happen. And that's what predestination is all about. And I like how the Holman Study Bible puts it. Predestination refers to the consistent and coherent intention of God's will, an eternal decision rendering certain that which will come to pass. Now, there's an interesting discussion or debate among scholars about this phrase and how God predestined us to be adopted into His family. If you think about it, God exists outside of space and time, right? We exist within space and time. God actually uses time as a tool. We see it as something we're a victim of. God didn't move fast enough, or God moved too slow, or this is happening too quickly. But God does not have time as something that limits Him at all. So because He is outside of space and time, in a way, He can look at the whole thing, the whole universe, and all of space and time at one time. I kind of picture it as this big ball, right? And He's looking at it, and He can dive in and look at a particular space and a particular time at any moment. He can see the whole thing from beginning to end all at once. and I'm not making a doctrine of this at all, but I just want to point out that since God is outside of space and time, God's choice about you at the beginning and His predestining you to a certain destination could literally, from our perspective in space and time, happen simultaneously. So there is this true interplay between our choices and God's choices. And for us, we just need to understand that if you put your heart and your soul into the hands of God, He will get you where you need to go. And the first thing that He has done is to be able to adopt us into His family. How does that work? How do you become adopted into God's family? Well, the folks that heard this letter being read would have been under Roman law. And Roman law is very interesting when it comes to the role of a father in the family and how adoption works. In Roman law, in the Roman family, the father had absolute authority. He could literally take the life of a family member and it would not be considered murder. Can you believe that? That just blew me away. Not only did he have ultimate authority of all the people in his family, he had ultimate authority over all the property as well. And adoption was used in the Roman culture in order for the father of a family to continue the family name and provide a place to give an inheritance of property. And the way that the adoption worked was that the first step was the release of the child from their natural father. And this happened by the natural father selling the child as a slave to the adoptive father 3 times. The son could then take his position of a natural son in the adopted family so that he could continue the family line and maintain property ownership in the family. And he then was transferred in his allegiance as a slave and then as a natural son into this new family until the father died, and then he would become the patriarch of the family. So what does that mean to us? How does that work into our being adopted into God's family? Well, Paul says this happened through Jesus Christ. Before we became adopted into God's family through Jesus, we were labeled as sons of obedience and children of wrath. The Scripture tells us that we were actually enemies of God. But because of what Jesus did in dying, paying the price to be able to adopt us into His family, we have now no more obligation to our natural father that the Lord Jesus tells us was actually Satan. Happened back in the Garden of Eden. I know you know the story. God now has absolute control over our lives. We have allegiance only to Him. We do not have to have allegiance to Lucifer and his ways anymore. That ownership has been released. Now, Satan doesn't want us to think that. And he will do anything to make us believe that we are still under his control and power. He will do it through intimidation. He will do it through temptation. He will do it through discouragement. But even though it sometimes appears that we still belong to Lucifer because maybe we still sin, maybe because the enemy hassles us, or whatever it might be, if you have put your weight down on Jesus Christ, you are owned lock, stock, and barrel by the Father. And you have been released by Satan. He has no hold over you anymore. And the idea of this happening through Jesus Christ is very interesting. It's used here in the idea of passing between 2 items, going through. And that, if you're a Bible student, that should remind you of something that happened way back in Genesis chapter 15. Do you remember Abram? Abram was this pagan guy living in Ur of the Chaldees. And God just decided to reach down and talk to Abram one day. And He said, Abram, get up on out of there and I want you to move. And Abram said, well, okay, I'll trust in you. I'll do what you say. And God began to move through one man and then ended up creating a people who birthed a Savior. But as he was working with Abram in chapter 15, God was making an agreement with Abram. And the Bible tells us that he cut the covenant with Abram, where they took sacrifices and they cut them in two and they laid them out. And then it says that God himself passed through the sacrifice himself. Now in those days, they would make an agreement by cutting an animal in half, and the two people who were making the agreement would pass through together. The idea there was, okay, buddy, we're making this binding legal agreement. If you let me down, I'm going to be able to do to you what we did to this animal, and I'm going to be able to cut you in half, in a sense. And so then the other guy would say, well, yeah, back at you, buddy. If you blow it in this covenant, I'm going to be able to do the same to you. Well, the normal idea here of making a covenant between Abram and God was that Abram and God would walk together through these sacrifices that had been cut apart, and there would be this kind of mutually assured destruction between the two of them. But Abram was otherwise predisposed. Basically, a deep sleep fell on him. He was unable to perform his part in the covenant ceremony. So God walked through those pieces alone. So what that said was, whether I blow it or you blow it, the penalty is going to fall on me. And of course, it's a wonderful, incredible picture of exactly what happened. We did blow it. We continued to sin. We continued to act in ways that God would not act or think or speak. And that penalty fell upon the Lord when he sent his Son to the cross. So God performed the covenant, made the promises, and also paid the penalty himself, so that as we pass through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, as his body was broken, as his blood was shed, we are able to have our allegiance and our ownership transferred from Satan to God, where he can present us without spot and blameless. So it says he predestined us to be adopted through Jesus Christ for himself. Did you notice that? I mean, normally, right, when you are thinking about the fact that you have been saved, what do you think about? Wow, my sins have been forgiven. I have been washed. I get to go to heaven. I get to have eternal life. And isn't this wonderful? And it's kind of me. And that's nothing wrong with that. It's a wonderful thing to meditate on. But look at what it says here. God did this for himself. God wants you in his family. God wants a relationship with you. Somehow, even though God needs nothing, he benefits from having you in his family, adopted into his family. One of the most famous, in the Christian world anyway, adoption scenes that I've ever witnessed before was when Stephen Curtis Chapman, the singer-songwriter, and when he adopted his baby from China. And they flew over there, and then you can see this wonderful meeting when parents and child meet for the first time. And I think about what it's like for the Father to welcome us into his family. We are foreign born. We're born in sin. And yet because of Jesus, he's paid the fees that are needed in order for him to be able to fly over to our lives. And when we come walking in, we don't know what to expect. What's it going to be like being in this new family? Are they really going to accept me? There's so much uncertainty, and yet the Father is so certain. He has given so much. There's nothing that can keep him from you, and he just wraps his arms around you and says, I'm so glad I was able to adopt you into my family. And there's this great joy and lots of tears being shed, and it's a wonderful thing. Get it out of your head that you're sneaking in the back door into heaven and hope that God doesn't notice you, because he really wouldn't like you. The thing is that he's brought you in the front door. He's got all the angels around, and they're going, man, God is great. He could even save Tom. You got to capture that joy. God did this for himself. He wants you. Unbelievable stuff. So, through Jesus Christ, for himself, according to his favor and will. The Greek word favor there is the word delight. And that's that feeling that I want you to capture. God delights to adopt you into his family. He's tickled pink to do it. The word is also translated kindly intent and pleasure. But I like that word, delight. And it's according to his favor and will. Will there means to purpose something. It wasn't that, God just looked down on us poor humans and had pity. We've lost our sin. He waves his magic wand and fixes our dilemma, but really there's no personal stake in it at all. Quite the contrary. As I mentioned, he planned the whole thing in advance because it pleased him to do it. It makes him happy to bring you into his family. He wants an intimate relationship with you, and he moved heaven and earth to make it happen. Wow. And then he finishes up in verse 6 saying, to the praise of his glorious grace that he favored us with in the beloved. God's grace is such a wonderful thing. And here, Paul is saying that his grace is glorious, which means that glory is kind of one of those real churchy words. It means heaviness, reality. It's God's character. In the Old Testament, at the temple, they talked about this thing called the Shekinah glory of God. It was the literal presence of God. And there was something weighty and real about it. And we talked earlier about spiritual blessings in the heavenlies and how we think that just means nothing. But in fact, God in his dimension is so much more real than ours. And if you were to encounter the person of God, you would finally understand what real reality is like. And his grace reflects the reality of who he is, of his character. He is gracious by nature. And it says that it happened in the beloved, and you notice in your Bible, most likely the word the beloved is capitalized. That was actually a first century term for Jesus, the beloved. Isn't that awesome? I like that. So again, Paul focuses it right back on the Messiah. For he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, to be holy and blameless in his sight in love. He predestined us to be adopted through Jesus Christ for himself, according to his favor and will, to the praise of his glorious grace that he favored us with in the beloved. So even this incredible working that he did to be able to adopt you into his family, it just turns right around and goes, yeah, that's God. That's just who he is. Ain't he great? He's so loving. He's so kind. How could anybody really be like this? Sometimes when you meet somebody that's just like too good to be true, you go, who are you? Nobody's really that nice. I just insulted you and you loved on me. Nobody's really that good. Yeah, but God is that good. He's more good than you could possibly imagine. He takes more guff than you could possibly give out, and yet he still loved enough to give everything that he had, his only son, so that he could take you who were owned as a slave into sin and could adopt you into his family to spend all of eternity just lavishing his love and his grace on you. So what does this mean for us practically? I just want to finish up with two simple thoughts. The first one is, this means you can chill. Stop trying to earn God's favor. Stop trying to make him like you by just being so good that he'd go, boy, that person's come a long way. I really was wondering for a while there, but I think they'll make it okay. I'll let them in. Stop trying to be so perfect that he'll love you more or do more things for you. And that's a trap that a lot of us fall into. I'm going to be really good, God, because I really want that prayer to be answered. It doesn't work that way. You want what God wants. All the good and all the bad. You want what he wants. And so that's how we need to pray. God, I want what you want. I know that's a hard prayer to pray. It's hard for me. But we need to just stop trying to make deals with God. Instead, we just need to trust Him more. Lord, I don't understand the situation. Here's what I envision this working out, and please do this. But you know, God, I want what you want. That's what Jesus said in the Garden of Gethsemane. He said, if there be any way for this cup to pass, let's not do this. He was basically saying, if we can get salvation to these people in any other way, then let's do it, because this is a hard way. But then he finished up saying, nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And if he can do that, he lives in us, we can do that too. And the second thing, which is right along with the first, just relax, just enjoy your relationship with him. Pray more, worship more, just love on him more. Because God is pleased with you. Wow, really? He must not really know me. Oh yeah. Notice that it's God's favor, His good pleasure, to give you this inheritance. We'll talk more about what that inheritance means as we go through these verses here. God can be pleased with you because He's pleased with His Son. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to Him. That's what the Father said about Jesus. But because of Jesus, He can be pleased with you individually. He can look at your life, because you have been washed. And I think I mentioned this as we're starting out, but it's a really important concept starting out this series in Ephesians. It's not like God just looks at you and He doesn't really see you. He sees Jesus. I mean, there's some truth to that. But it's the character, it's the life that He gave to you individually. He doesn't want just a bunch of little Jesus puppets. He wants you individually. And because He washed you, He can be pleased with you as an individual. So what the writer of Hebrews said is really true for us, that we should approach the throne of grace with boldness so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us at the proper time. Let's pray. Lord, we just recognize once again that it is by your favor, by your grace, that you have adopted us into your family. It's something that blows our mind, that you would want so much to be with us, that you would predetermine the outcome so that we could end up being with you for all of eternity. It's nothing that we can earn. There's nothing that we can say. There's no deal that can be struck. You're the one who made the covenant, and you're the one who performed it. And then you turn around and give it to us. What's with that? But we are so thankful. We're so grateful. And Lord, I pray that if there be those here with us, be those listening at another time or place, and they have heard this word, and they have decided they too want this eternal life. If that's you, just pray this very simple prayer in the sincerity of your heart. Just pray, God, I have sinned and fallen short of your character. I have gone my own way instead of yours. But I recognize that you came and you died to pay the penalty for all the bad stuff I've done. And then you rose up again from the dead, giving me life that will never end and adopting me into your family. I want to be adopted into your family. I put my weight down on you, Jesus. I recognize that it's all about you. I want you to be the one forgiving. I want you to be the one in charge. If you can pray that prayer, you have been adopted into God's family. The angels are applauding. The Father is wrapping His arms around you, even though you can't see it. Maybe if you can't even feel it, it's happening. It's a reality. And there is great joy in God's dimension when one person repents and turns their heart over to God. Help us, Lord, every day of our lives to keep this in mind, that you are pleased with us, that you want to spend time with us, and that you have predetermined, predestined the outcome of all of this stuff so that we can be with you. We thank you for this in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you guys. All right. Praise God. Have a wonderful day.